there appears to have been some feedback on your really good drawing of Mr. Flashy's tracksuit logo from the other day.
It may be Monterex.
Yeah, which is what you said yourself.
Possibly, yeah. I could have just drawn it really badly on the spot. But yeah, it's sort of mountainy.
Mountainy.
Yeah. And I did look up old pictures of him, and he had previously worn Monterex, a different top, but...
It's a kind of a different thing to be kind of like going around the fashion of the criminals, isn't it?
Well,
going down into the weeds of
it is,
that
but
stage.
I suppose when you consider Mr. Flashy, that is his nickname.
Well, it is, and usually you're kind of able to... It's usually, unless you're blind completely, you are usually able to see the giant logos.
Yeah.
I do quite like to wear the big logos.
They do.
He was just a bit understated there the other day, and he confused us.
Yeah.
But not the listeners and the viewers who have come in their flocks to the social media sites to sort of let us know what they believe your drawing to be. Anyway, moving on to, Maurice Sines, like... He's a gift that keeps giving, isn't he? Since we first laid eyes on him, which was kind of, remember seeing this pictures of this guy who was knocking around an awful lot with the Kavanaghs and the Byrnes, as in Bomber Kavanagh and Liam Byrne. And there was kind of like, they must have all been on Facebook, and they were, Sines had a son, I think called Fred.
Fred Jr.,
Fred, and he's changed his name, of course, to Doe. To Fred Doe. Maurice Sines is now Fred Doe Sines, isn't he?
They're both Fred Doe now, senior and junior.
They changed their names by deed poll in recent years. But I do remember seeing him popping up. He was this bald-headed guy. There was a lot of wealth around them. And they were very much at family dues, and we actually photographed him going into a christening of the Byrne family pre-2016, all the way back there, 10 years ago. Youngsters who would have been knocking around with the younger Byrnes were over in his house, this mansion that always had sort of Rolls Royces outside it, and they were posing in the cars and everything. And he was clearly a really close friend. We only realised how close, of course, when he stood shoulder to shoulder with Thomas Bomber Kavanagh at the funeral of David Byrne. And he came along with his business partner, James Crickmore. Now, he's back in the news because he is a pest. I mean, this guy has so much money. And my God, does he know what to do with it when he wants to torment people, particularly his wealthy neighbours.
Yeah, because, I mean, Fred Doe, as he's known now, is a hugely wealthy man. I mean, he made a lot of his money from, various things, but a lot of them are to do with caravan parks that he owned across England, and that he also built some of these kind of semi-permanent caravan parks as well. As you said, a huge amount of money. You'd see, I think he put a lot of it up on social media, did videos, appeared in, a number of TV programs, and he would have Rolls Royce after Rolls Royce after Rolls Royce. I mean, this isn't one of these guys that has got a pimped up council house. I mean, this is a hugely wealthy man. But he's always had those underworld connections simultaneously with that wealth. And he describes himself as coming from a traveller or gypsy background, as he terms it. So despite all that wealth, he's always rubbed up against his neighbours. And his latest one is in a place called Eton, just next to Eton School. I mean, I think Eton School is possibly the most exclusive private secondary school in the world. I think they say, Boris Johnson went there. I think they've had more, I think the vast majority of English prime ministers have gone to Eton.
And royalty. Of course,
didn't Prince William and Prince Harry go there? So a plot of land came up for sale next to Eton, which is obviously, it's just outside London, I think. One obviously very exclusive, and for whatever reason, Maurice Sines, or Fred Doe, as he's now known, bid for this plot of land. And apparently it's a small field. You can actually see some of the aerial photos. It doesn't look big, but he paid £783,000 for it, which is a huge amount of money.
Well, he outbid the school, didn't he?
He outbid the school. It's right next to the school. Presumably wanted to use it for sports or building on again or whatever. And
also let us be corrected if we need to be by our English listeners, and because they do. And I like when you come back with the information, but I'm going to say this is a really exclusive neighbourhood as well as, being the place.
Well, it is because we've talked about Maurice Sines in relation to, various, his associates being involved in, various serious criminality like, money laundering, drugs, guns. But this story was actually published in the Mail in the UK is about how he's committed the ultimate crime, which is deflating the house prices around Eton.
Yeah.
Which I don't know if it tugs at the heartstrings in the same way, does it? But
well, I mean, look at what he's done to that site.
Yeah.
So that piece of land that he bought, that he outbid Eton School for, seems to have used it almost like a dumping ground for shipping containers, which are obviously big, large, ugly-looking metal things.
Yeah.
Caravans, some of which seem to be in use and some of which aren't. Old car, scrap metal, you name it, has gone in there. And he's done quite an incredible job filling up that field, hasn't he?
Yeah, and I think it's described as an open storage, which just means there's no buildings or anything.
No, so you can just all left there.
So you can just see the containers dumped in the open air, side after side. And it's a small field, but it's a big load of cars just lined up right in the middle of this, one of the most, well, as far as we can tell, one of the most exclusive areas of London.
Now, he'd already come to blows somewhat. He was trying to get planning permission for one of these caravan sites that he has. Now, most of these are kind of almost like retirement homes.
Yeah.
They seem to be kind of like, in the UK, there seems to be this position where you can downsize a house into one of these semi-permanent homes which are on a serviced site. They're essentially mobile homes, but not. We're not talking like a trailer park.
No,
here.
we're not. You're talking about, I suppose, they're gated communities where there would be these not traditional mobile homes, but sort of maybe structures that aren't, brick and mortar, basically.
And I suppose just again for our English UK listeners, we don't have these here.
No.
This is why we're sort of talking about them as if they're alien to us.
Yeah.
We definitely don't have retirement villages which are made up of mobile home structures or those semi-permanent. No. We probably will do in the future, particularly with the housing situation. But nonetheless, this is alien to us, so bear with us here. So this was he was apparently looking for planning to put one of these near where Sir Elton John lives, and another.
I mean, that was actually his first, one of his first real
forays into the media.
Was when he came to metaphorical blows with Elton John. Over trying to put up one of these locations. I think that was next to Windsor Castle. So he obviously likes. Moving in those circles, and Elton John and a number of other of the wealthy residents objected, and there was a long-term dispute. Yeah,
there's a couple of orders, I think, in place for him to kind of clean up this site, but he's ignored them, and he does tend to ignore stuff. I mean, Maurice Sines is a little bit of an anarchist. We'll go back a little bit. In actual fact, the furthest we can really go with him, and I'm sure there's been plenty before this, is about 20 odd years ago in 2004 when he starts buying two things. One is these sites where he's going to put his caravan parks, and the other is racehorses.
Yeah.
And along with his business partner, James Crickmore, they take themselves off to the racetracks where they are betting an incredible amount of money, where they are owning very well-known horses, but where they are also end up under investigation in a bet-to-lose scam on English race courses by the British Horse Racing Authority. There was allegations that there had been some, and actually I think I detailed a bit of this in my book, Cocaine Cowboys, because it was at a period of time that horse racing had attracted some of these new cocaine multimillionaires who needed to wash their money, and they needed to find ways, and they're always on a scam as well, aren't they?
They are.
It's not enough to make 300 million out of a few cocaine shipments. They also have to, make another few bob if they bet to lose. But what was happening in around 2009 was a number of races had been sort of, they believed, possibly rigged. Horses that should have won, essentially. It looked as if they'd sort of been pulled back or stopped. You talk to people people in the horse industry and those who know horses, and it seems to be a sure thing to make a horse lose.
Yeah.
It's never a sure thing, of course, to make a horse win.
No.
But to make them lose is easier, and there are multiple ways of doing that. You know, you pull the reins for a start would be one of them.
Yeah.
But you can kind of, I think, if you know what you're looking at on the racetrack, see that happening, or certainly questions will come about. And there was 10 particular races that sort of fell into suspicion. Now, there was all sorts of things going on in the British Horse Racing Authority, and people involved in this at the time was a whole other story. But we're going to stick to Sines and his business partner Crickmore for the moment. And that investigation began in 2009. And as I said, a number of jockeys were questioned and they were under investigation.
Because he'd had phone contact with them.
He was calling them. The main allegation against him was that as the registered owner, he was subject to the rules of racing. So he was a registered owner of horses, but he was engaging in this conspiracy. He was basically using a betting account from somebody else. Actually, a guy called Simon Gold was involved and Nick Gold. They were two people who have come into our radar as well. But there was a Betfair account that they were using. So they were obviously not betting under their own names, even though they owned the horses.
Yeah.
And they're putting massive bets on. At the last minute, notably for the horses who were favourites maybe to lose.
Yeah.
So he was basically, because he was a registered owner and subject to the rules of racing, he was basically investigated for engagement in this conspiracy to lose these 10 suspect races. And Crickmore, James Crickmore, his business partner in the Caravan sites, was also registered owner. So they owned between them a couple of pretty well-known horses, and he was the co-conspirator. Now, they defended themselves in the investigation, and Sines said he never had any involvement in what they call lay betting at all. He said his interest was only in backing, and he habitually, he said, backed short-priced favourites.
Yeah, and he says, didn't he, that he was in contact with the jockeys, but it was totally innocent. And if they looked at his phones, you would have seen he was in contact with loads of other jockeys.
They were just friends.
They were just friends, and they might give you a tip, but they're bad tipsters.
He said he actually called them the worst tipsters ever, jockeys.
Which might be some truth in that, if ever. Yeah.
And he was adamant that the British Horse Racing Authority's concentration upon just these 10 races, with which the inquiry was concerned, created a false picture of overall of what he at. But he basically wasn't believed in this. Crickmore also said he had a different approach to betting from Sines, who was his close friend. He said he would occasionally lay horses, but he denied any involvement in the lay betting for the 10 races. And he had this BetDAC, as they call it, account called Jimmy 8. So in other words, it wasn't in his own name. So he was using, he said he placed some bets through Nick Gold's Chelsea Boy 55 account. You remember the Golds, Simon and Nick Gold? We'll come back to them another time, but they were interesting characters. And that was their accounts with Betfair. Now, despite the fact that they denied any involvement in this, by 2011, they were banned for 14 years. For betting and from racetracks, actually, and for betting on their own horses to lose,
which was a big story at the time. It really, it was a big scandal in the horse racing industry. It's one of those kind of moments of truth, I suppose, and obviously a 14-year ban, which is a huge amount of time.
And we won't go into the jockeys for the moment, because I remember it was quite complex, and some of the jockeys were banned. Then they appealed, and the appeals won, and they were basically back racing. And there was about, there wasn't 10 jockeys involved, but there might have been 6 of them. And some of them were sort of not even found to have done anything. So it was a very complex investigation. But what I suppose the key thing that came out of it was that Sines and Crickmore were banned from the racetrack. Now, that ban, I only noted, went up until about, was it December 2024? So just some months ago. And at that time, Crickmore was banned again for a few months, which was lifted around April time. You can check those bans on the British Horse Racing Authority website, which we must do for both of them. There was no detail of why, he was put on again, but there you go. So in the meantime, they're banned from the race courses, but that doesn't stop them really kind of causing controversy elsewhere. And in particular, I think, with their parks. And in 2013, something happens there.
Yeah, they were fined for bullying residents at a park home on the Isle of Wight. So again, this is another one of these sites that they had, and there's always been these allegations have come up around them, I suppose. And in this case, they go to court and there was a fine.
So they were elderly residents that were living in these retirement properties, and they were accused of basically bullying them. Some of them wanted to sell their houses or buy their houses or buy the land under the the way there's always this
kind of residency or whatever, you've lived there for.
And there was problems along those lines. So they were fined, and they were kind of hit the headlines around that stage. In the aftermath, Sines had his set to with Sir Elton John.
Yeah.
And I suppose starts becoming a doyen of the tabloid media because he is a controversial figure.
Yeah. And he's another one of these guys who, whenever it's something like this arises, he'll do interviews and he'll give a load of comments. There's no problem there. And then also in a funny way, like some of these other people that we've spoken about, they kind of live this double life, because although there's these stories about them, including ultimately the stories about them being linked to the Byrne organised crime group, they're also simultaneously running this high profile charity, for example, where they're having news stories written about them being charity bosses. And Maurice Sines in particular appears on a number of kind of reality, not Big Brother or anything.
I haven't seen any of this stuff.
Yeah, no, but he's on these programs where he's being interviewed as a kind of a quirky, businessman. So it's a funny kind of, it's almost equivalent to the Daniel Kinahan thing, where on one hand, he's on the front of the papers as a crime boss, and then you open up the sports section of another paper and he's been spoken about as a legitimate boxing promoter. So they have this kind of double life. But I suppose it's when they start appearing on the radar in connection with the Dublin wing of the Kinahan Cartel, in particular the Byrne family.
And the Birmingham wing as well,
Yeah.
the West Midlands, which we saw recently in the BBC documentary in relation to the Kinahans. But it's around 2013 and 2015, whatever's going on in the UK and all the rest of it, Sines and co start coming on, certainly my radar. And I do remember he was over and back to Dublin. It was difficult to identify who he was. He used to stay in the Westbury Hotel. He'd visit the Byrnes. He seems to be loaning the cars. Yeah, the two Byrne brothers, actually, the late David Byrne and his Liam Byrne, are seen going around Dublin in these massive cars. I mean, the cars themselves were worth photographing, let alone who was behind the wheel. David Byrne in particular seemed to be the driver of them. There was a Mercedes G-Wagon, which I can't remember exactly what the spec on that was, but there certainly were some sort of neon lights down the side of it. And
I remember getting a picture of it, I think, in outside a hotel in Dublin city centre. And somebody threw an egg at us and we had to leave. But that
was actually a christening, which was in the Dublin 8 area, and that christening was a kind of a family event for the Byrne family, who were, of course, the Dublin wing of the Kinahan organisation. And Liam Byrne, David Byrne, and their sister Joanne Byrne is married to Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, who basically became the number one player in the Kinahan organisation all over the UK and was ultimately taken down in an NCA investigation, two of them actually. But Sines is here. He's loaning them cars. At one point, he loans the Byrnes a car, a Rolls-Royce Phantom, which is used for it's for the Debs ball, the after-school ball of
Lee Byrne,
who is now in a relationship with Stephen Gerrard's daughter, Lily Gerrard, and I think they're expecting a child. So he's going to his Debs, his last sort of hurrah after school, and he's picked up in Raleigh Square where the family lives, which is a small, tight little driveway. Yeah. And this Rolls-Royce Phantom pulls in, and the two school kids get in, and off they go to their Debs ball. So this kind of thing was happening all the time.
Yeah, and there's car companies all over the place. There's TK Motors in Birmingham, which is registered to Thomas Kavanagh and Joanne Byrne, and there's LS Active Sales, isn't it, in Dublin?
Sales,
which is Liam Byrne is a registered owner, and Sean McGovern, I think, is a registered director as well.
McGovern, who's now Daniel Kinahan's right-hand man, is number 2, who's wanted here. And there's a warrant being issued for him to appear in court in Dublin for the murder of Noel Duckegg Kerwin, the monk's friend.
So there's a load of these car companies, and the cars are moving between the UK and Ireland. They're legitimately registered, I suppose, but it ultimately will become the focus of the cab case brought against the Byrne organised crime group, that these movements of cars were a way to launder money effectively, and that these companies were being used so you could get a car, it would go down. Complex, isn't it? But some of it would be that you would drive around in this car, and although you were the beneficial owner, it would go down as if it was basically a rental car that you were using. And there was a lot of other companies, a lot of other movements of cars, and Sines and Crickmore were also appearing on some of those transactions and some of the movements of money around those cars.
Crickmore, I think, put up the seed capital for the establishment of LS Active Car Sales. You're starting to see those kind of the two families really between the Sines and Crickmore, even though they're two separate families, they're one unit. We'll see them as coming really, really close together with the Byrne Kavanagh families. In 2015, the Criminal Assets Bureau had started to look at the Byrne brothers in particular because of their display of wealth in these cars. They had noted that the cars were registered to Maurice Sines / Fred Doe now. But they also discovered in 2015, so Liam Byrne had done a huge amount of renovations on a house that he owned in Raleigh Square, and he'd actually essentially doubled the size of the house without planning permission. He had created a jacuzzi and a bar inside it. It was a real kind of a, cocaine cowboys hacienda really in the middle of Crumlin. And there was a playground on the roof and a bar on the roof of it and this, that and the other. And it was a huge job. It was one of these cases you would have heard subsequently coming up in the Criminal Assets Bureau case that the renovation work on the house was, outshone the actual value of the property. And, a lot of that is used in evidence in proceeds of crime cases now, how much it costs to develop these properties. But a sort of a house there on that same row, number 6 Raleigh Square, all of a sudden these kind of building works start on it, and it looks like it's going to be a complete replica of Liam Byrne's house. Now, there was a bit of digging done, and it was initially presumed that the Byrnes had bought the house off somebody, or that they were the owners of it, and they were doing it up at the time, apparently, for Lee Byrne to live in. But it turned out that this company linked to Sines and Crickmore had bought the house, and they had paid $280,000 for it. So he's buying the property next door to Liam Byrne at this stage. Such is the closeness between Sines, Byrne and Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. Of course, onward to 2016, and David Byrne is killed at the Regency Hotel. That sparks the Kinahan Hutch feud, which goes on for years, is still really in the ether nowadays, although it is the murders have calmed. But Sines comes over and he attends, along with James Crickmore, the house of Jaws and Sadie Byrne, the parents of David Byrne. He attends that house for the wake. Yeah. David Byrne is laid out in the home. People are visiting. They're coming to pay their respects. It's a tight inner circle.
Yeah, I mean, I think
both come over.
Yeah, and it is genuinely the sort of the tightest of tight circles. I mean, the only picture of Daniel Kinahan and Bomber Kavanagh visiting the home, they visit the home during that wake. That's the only time they're pictured together. But in those sort of that tight inner circle comes Maurice Sines as well, and that's replicated then when you see the pictures of the burial, where it's like to your degree of importance, you stand close to the coffin, I suppose. And right up the top are people like Daniel Kinahan, Bomber Kavanagh. They're getting sort of, they're given that kind of respect. But right behind them are Sines and Crickmore, just showing how close they are at that point.
Close they are, exactly. Now, by 2018, that Criminal Assets Bureau case has come before the courts, the High Court in Dublin. And, it's all about Byrne and his associates and houses they have purchased. And it's about using cars as currency, and it's about LS Active car sales. It brings us back actually to James Mulvey, the business partner of Thomas Bomber Kavanagh, who'd been at this point returned from Lithuania by the National Crime Agency and was facing, or had either got or was facing, more than 30 years in prison on drug conspiracy charges. But he had transferred money for the purchase of one of these homes through Mauritius. It was all very complicated. But in the middle of it, and in their submissions to the High Court, the Criminal Assets Bureau claim that Sines and Crickmore are regular visitors to Dublin, at which time they're in the company of members of this Kinahan organised crime group. And it's really at this point, because that piece of information is put before the High Court, that I think in general the media start becoming comfortable saying that about Sines and Crickmore.
Yeah.
Because this is put on record now in the High Court of Ireland. So, they also said that they stay at the Westbury Hotel, where it's been established that Liam Byrne has paid for some of their stays. And I'm quoting the Criminal Assets Bureau affidavit. They feature prominently at the funeral of Liam's brother David Byrne, shot dead in February 2016 at the Regency. Maurice Sines is pictured wearing the same suit as other leading figures in the organised crime gang. And that suit was the uniform of the Kinahan organised crime group at that point. It was worn by an army of young men mostly. And then you see the likes of Thomas Bomber Kavanagh in it, some of his sons. You see Fat Freddie Thompson in it, his brother Richie, and Daniel Kinahan himself. And it says this is believed to be a display of solidarity by the wider Kinahan organised crime gang, and an indication of the level of trust he holds within this group, he being Sines. James Crickmore's company also transferred funds electronically to LS Active Car Sales bank account, providing seed capital for the business to start trading. On early compliance visits, Liam Byrne stated that James Crickmore was providing vehicles to him on a sale or return basis, a scheme used by criminals in the motor industry. And ultimately, what the Criminal Assets Bureau put before the High Court at this stage was the allegation that James Crickmore and Maurice Sines are under investigation for their involvement in an ongoing VAT and VRT fraud in the UK. Both have acquired significant wealth, which they flaunt. That didn't pop up again, the VAT or VRT fraud. Sometimes you can find those investigations go nowhere or take years.
Yeah, and obviously Thomas Kavanagh at some point before, around this time, was also prosecuted for VRT fraud, I think, and got a suspended sentence and a large fine. Maurice Sines at some point later does speak about that, even though I don't think there was ever any conviction or anything like that, but he does speak about police breaking into his house and terrifying his wife as part of an investigation into fraud. So in the aftermath, I suppose, what happened with the feud, it started off as a local Irish story, but it really became this international story, and it remains an international story to this day, as we've seen with the BBC programme, where the Kinahan name moved from being, reported in papers in Ireland to being reported around the world. And at that point, Maurice Sines in particular doesn't seem as happy with the association that he went out of his way to show at the point of the funeral. Certainly, we did get an email at one point from a press officer, I suppose, who'd been hired to say that he I don't know, certainly wasn't
it had nothing to do with the Kinahan Cartel. Was that not after the sanctions and all that? And
No, it was
before.
Was it? Before that.
Was it?
Yeah, it was way before that. It was
2018 maybe.
2018, 2019.
Okay.
Obviously at that point
we were trying to set up an interview with him actually at that point.
He
was supposed to be doing it, and then we were ghosted.
We were ghosted. So he stopped being happy with that association because obviously what's going on underneath, and wasn't maybe so publicly acknowledged at that stage, the Bomber Kavanagh investigation, we now know, had kicked into a high level within the NCA, who were monitoring the movement of drugs, or suspected movement of drugs, by various logistical companies across the UK, and they were following up members of Thomas Bomber Kavanagh's crime gang, monitoring phone calls, they had really stepped up that investigation. And I think that was what drove this desire to be disassociated.
Yeah. And I mean, actually, that investigation starts in January of 2017 when the piece of paper is found here, when the weapons factory, Bomber's weapons factory, is discovered, and huge amount of firearms, some of them primed and ready for use, are found. And there's a piece of paper that links back to the West Midlands and basically gives NCA the opportunity to go for Kavanagh and his operation. At that time, a year later, because around 2018, Sines is still very much involved with Liam Byrne and Thomas Bomber Kavanagh. In actual fact, Liam Byrne is living in a house in Tamworth, which is owned by Maurice Sines' company.
Yeah.
And it's on Trees Road or something it's called from memory. It was a red brick house, and he moved in there with his family, having previously in 2016, because of course Liam Byrne left Ireland not long after the Regency, not long after his brother was killed, because the Criminal Assets Bureau came for him within months of the murder of his own brother. And I mean, they took the door off the hinges with a chainsaw or something, an angle grinder. They went in and they really made their presence known. And Liam Byrne left Ireland, and he moved initially to the UK, where he set up another car company, and he moved and registered an address in one of Maurice Sines' Caravan parks.
Yes, that's right.
Which was where he was supposed to be living with his family. And I know people often find safety, they feel safe and secure in those caravan parks for some reason. I suppose you have to, there's only one way in and out, and I don't know. Anyway, we've seen plenty of people sort of lie low in these caravan parks, but you're not lying that low when you register your address on a company's website, which is where we found it. But he subsequently, by 2018, is living in a really nice plush house owned again by Sines. So he's still linked in with Kavanagh and Byrne, despite trying to pull a little bit back because of this investigation by the NCA. Feeling very confident again by 2020, though, isn't he? I mean, Bomber is already in custody at this stage. He's out.
He's out.
In his Rolls-Royce Phantom.
Which is £405,000, one can say.
That's ridiculous.
It's a phenomenal amount of money.
I get my head around that.
Yeah.
How much is that in euro?
Well, it's something like see. About, it's...
Keep talking and I'll find out.
460,000 euros, I would imagine.
We can only deal in yo-yos.
It's a huge amount of money. Now, this is a fun... Yeah, so... There's a great case, and it gets reported in all the papers just for the obvious reasons. So basically, Maurice Sines, he's at a golf tournament, a local charity golf tournament, and
where is this now? In London or where?
Well,
where does he live exactly? This is where we need help.
It's Wentworth Estate, is what it's
476,000. That was that's like the price of a house.
I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of money.
So the Wentworth Estate is a private estate of large houses in the borough of Runnymede in Surrey. Okay, Surrey, it's in Surrey.
Okay.
Which is outside London.
So he's at this...
posh, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I think so.
Do you not know?
No, not really.
What's wrong with us that we know the geography of so many places, except we haven't... Well, I'm very bad at England, I have to say. I've been over and back many's a time.
Yeah.
Largely to do with work, I have to say. We didn't ever holiday in the UK, did you?
I did. I have been on holidays in the UK as a child.
But no, I don't.
Yeah.
But no, I just don't have my geography right.
Yes.
Anyway, but sorry, we're going to get it right this time.
So basically, he was serving a driving ban at the time. This is in the actual incident happened in May 2018, but it came to court in 2020. So he's serving a driving ban. He's obviously a married family man. Mm-hmm. Police spot his Rolls Royce, which is presumably quite noticeable.
The married family man obviously has something to do with this story, does it?
Well, kind of, Nicola.
Yeah.
So they spot this Rolls Royce. There can't be too many Rolls Royces of that type. They presumably are aware he's got a driving ban, and they pursue the car. And I think he kind of gets away, but they eventually stop him. And what he says was ultimately that he hadn't been driving it. They pursue the car. Mm-hmm. He overtakes a couple of vehicles, drives around the roundabout on the wrong way, causes one car to make an emergency stop, and there's a head-on collision. Ultimately, the police have to kind of stop the pursuit or whatever. It gets dangerous. But they've obviously seen this Rolls Royce going, and they've taken the reg, and maybe they have pictures or whatever. So they know it's Maurice Sines' Rolls. They don't catch him red-handed, But they follow him and go to interview him. And what he says was he denies that he was driving the Rolls Royce.
Okay.
And the excuse he gives was he had a chauffeur driving it. And the reason he couldn't stop was because, and I'm quoting this, he was with a bird who was not his wife, who was giving him oral sex.
Oh, Jesus.
But this is what it says in court. You have a duty to report this stuff. And that
it's too much.
It was being driven by, what it said was it was being driven by his driver. And he said that after estranging from his wife, he had a bird in the back having a suck. And he told his driver not to stop because he did not want to be caught in that situation.
Well,
end
who would?
quote. End quote.
In fairness to Mr. Sines.
Yeah. Would you not think you just say I was wrong? But anyway, so
no, I mean, I don't know why he'd need to give that level of detail, but that's sort of the anarchist in him. Well,
yes,
a little bit, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, so that was a bit of a whoopsies.
Ultimately, he changed his story and he told the judge, "I'm ashamed of what I've done. I've let my family down, and I've let me down. I should not have been driving. I just swerved out of my drive and panicked, and I did something I should not have done. I regret."
It was all a honker about the word.
It was.
Oh my God!
Yeah, so the judge described him as remarkably foolish.
Yeah. Oh,
there you go.
And what did he say? I've let me down.
I've let me down.
That's a bit narcissistic, isn't it?
Well, look. So, yeah, he put forward, the judge
I've let
said...
my family down. I've let me down.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
You let yourself down. It's what do you know, say that to your kids? You've let yourself down now.
Well, I do say it to others.
Yeah.
I definitely don't say it about myself. That in the first person thing.
No.
Now, 2023, Crickmore and Sines again together. I mean, they really are together throughout, aren't they?
They are.
They start to call in debts owed to them by a guy called Robert Bull. Do you know much of this story?
Well, I do. I mean, it's another really complicated story, but Robert Bull is in a similar sort of business to Sines and Crickmore, building these kind of homes that we spoke about earlier. And he became
prefabricated bungalows for retirement communities. What have we been calling them? Mobile homes, caravans?
Well, I think, look, they're sort of modular homes, I suppose we might have something along those lines. So Robert Bull becomes this, it comes from a very humble background, and he becomes a billionaire. I mean, there's not many billionaires out there. He makes a huge amount of money. Ultimately, he floats his company on the stock exchange and he literally becomes a billionaire. But like a lot of these guys, like all of these businesses really, you know, they operate on the basis of bank loans and they have debt as they expand. It's just normal. So he gets in some dispute with Sines. And basically he owes some money to Sines and Sines recalls it in a particular way. And there's a lot of disputes about it, but basically Robert Bull goes into administration because he can't repay these loans straight away. And then you hear...
It's through Sines Park Holdings Limited.
It is.
Which is Crickmore and Sines' company. Yeah.
And
they apply to put Royal Life, which is what Bull's company is called, the Royal Life Group. They apply to put those units into administration.
Yes.
And Sines Park is ultimately majority owned by
Fred Doe, which is Maurice Sines.
Yeah. But ultimately, so they kind of like, it's like everyone else panics, is it?
Kind of. I mean, there's the money isn't there, it panics and it all, he ultimately has to file for bankruptcy. Now, he's subsequently done a lot of interviews claiming he's being intimidated, subjected to campaigns of harassment.
Was there a story recently about his...
There was a story recently about a robbery at his home.
Yeah.
So all of that is ongoing, I suppose. Now, certainly Maurice Sines and James Crickmore have never been criminally prosecuted or anything in relation to that. However, you know, there have been allegations made by Robert Bull.
Yeah, and that story floats on. Now, I suppose the most recent time we were talking about Maurice Fred Sines was in relation to his aforementioned son, who is Fred Doe, yeah?
Fred Doe Jr.
Fred Doe Jr., yeah.
Yes.
As in Fred Sines Jr. He was Fred Sines Jr.
He was known as Fred. He was Fred Sines.
He's a married guy in his 30s.
Yeah.
So he gets caught up in the theft of a solid gold toilet worth 5.7 million euro or 4.8 million pounds in the UK.
So, I mean, we spoke about this before. It's kind of it's basically an art installation, is it? So somebody has built this toilet made of gold. It's a working toilet that flushes, and it's obviously worth 4.8 billion. They put it million. So
million. There's a major difference between
what did I say?
Billions and millions, and we haven't even gone to squillions.
No. Okay, so
it's a problem when you start talking this sort of false monopoly money. You just.
So it sounds bizarre anyway, doesn't it? It's an art installation, and presumably they borrowed the gold to make this, but it's left in this place called Blenheim Palace overnight. Where's that, Nicola? Exactly.
I'm going to Google that because that's the bit we got wrong, and one of my pals corrected me on it.
It's left in there.
It's
overnight.
in Woodstock.
In Woodstock. Where's that exactly?
No, stop.
The toilet is left there basically overnight, and it gets stolen. Some guys come along with a van. There's CCTV of guys breaking in. They carry out this solid gold toilet, amazingly, put it in the back of the van. It's so heavy that the van you can see the van sagging as it's driven away. And it was never seen again. What the police believe and have effectively proven is that the artwork was treated with no respect and was simply melted down and sold off. And the
price of gold has been going up and up recently.
It has, and it's going up even still. So one of the people that are convicted in relation to it is Fred Doe Jr. Now, he's not suspected of being involved in the actual robbery, but he's accused of being involved in basically the facilitation of the sale of that gold. He was ultimately convicted, even though he had denied it. And there's been a number of documentaries and everything about it. And he speaks again about, the case involved, that's saying that he had these connections, I suppose, in this criminal underworld. Some of them through his traveller background is how it's described.
His father walked with him, I think, into court. Woodstock, by the way, is north of Oxford. Just in case you were wondering. And now, here we go again, and he's back with his sort of iron junkyard.
He's back with his iron junkyard. He has described, in fact, after his son was convicted, I suppose he described, Maurice Sines did an interview with the Daily Mail, and he said basically that he's being unfairly targeted, him and his family, as a result of that Kinahan connection. And he says, this case, his son's case, is about me. Police believe that something that's not there. We are straight, legitimate people. But if you listen to these stories, I'm Al Capone. My son is like my dad was. He'd do anything for anyone. He has a heart of gold, Sines told the Daily Mail.
A heart of gold.
Exactly.
Instead of a toilet of gold. Right, well, maybe we shall try and... I wonder, is this press officer still working for him?
Well, we dig out that email and give it a try again.
Was there a number on it, I wonder?
There was, I think.
If you're listening, Maurice, you could obviously slide into my DMs, which are always open, or into Niall's, whichever one you prefer. But yeah, maybe we should ask him what's he at?
Yeah.
And what are his connections with the Kinahans? Is he really just friends with Thomas Bomber Kavanagh? And is he somehow disassociating the fact that Kavanagh is, up there as a number, an equal almost of Daniel Kinahan, or certainly was at one stage. He's not any longer because his entire empire has fallen. But so maybe we will try and do that.
We will.
Yeah. Thanks, Nicola.
Thanks, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.